The bus stop stood at the edge of the old neighborhood, a forgotten patch of cracked pavement framed by leaning trees and the remains of a rusted bench. It had no shelter, just a faded sign tilted at an angle and a single flickering streetlight above. It was the kind of place people passed by, without looking, the kind of place that felt wrong to stand near when it got dark. I began noticing the child after my work schedule changed, forcing me to take the late bus home. The first night I saw him, I thought nothing of it, just a small figure standing by the post, head bowed, hands pressed against the straps of a worn backpack. He could not have been older than 8, maybe 9. I figured he was waiting for someone. His stillness was strange, but I brushed it off and walked past. When I boarded the bus, I looked through the window, expecting to see him climb in after me. He did not. The bus idled for a few seconds, then pulled away, leaving him behind. When I looked back, he had not moved, just stood in the same position, head still lower. The next night, he was there again, same spot, same posture, same dirty brown coat that seemed far too thin for the cold his shoes were soaked through from the rain. But he did not shiver, he just stood there under the flickering light. I glanced at him longer this time, thinking maybe he was lost, but something in me resisted the idea of walking closer. After the third night, curiosity got the better of me. I stepped toward him slowly and called out softly. He did not look up. His face was hidden beneath the shadow of his hair, and the yellow light above made his outline seem faint, almost transparent. I reached out a hand and hesitated because the air around him felt colder, not the ordinary chill of evening, but a deep emptiness that seeped into the skin. I withdrew quickly, pretending it was nothing, and boarded the bus again that night. I could not sleep. I kept replaying the image of the child, unmoving in that light, the way the shadows bent around him like a ripple in water, the way the rain had soaked the pavement, but not the patch directly beneath his feet, as though the ground itself rejected it a week past. And he never missed a night, always standing there, always silent. One evening, the bus driver, a tired man with heavy eyes, asked if I had noticed him too. I nodded, relieved someone else saw him. The driver shook his head, said he had been standing there long before I ever started taking the route. No one knew where he came from or where he went. The police had checked once after someone complained, but found nothing. When they returned later, the child was gone, only to reappear the next evening exactly as before. That was when things started to change. The bus lights began to flicker. Whenever we approached the stop, passengers grew restless, whispering among themselves. Some refused to look out the window. One night, the driver skipped the stop entirely, muttering something about the timetable. But when we passed, I saw the boy standing in the road watching us go by, even though his face remained hidden. Soon after, I began noticing odd things outside the bus. I would be walking home late and see small footprints in the mud trailing behind me, though I was alone. Sometimes I heard the faint sound of dripping water when there was no rain. Other times it was the creak of something shifting in the dark just beyond my vision. The bus driver stopped showing up after a few more nights. They said he quit, but no one believed it. The new driver avoided conversation, eyes fixed forward. Every time we reached that stop, the child remained where he always was, still motionless beneath the yellow light. The last night before I stopped taking the bus altogether, I saw something that made me feel my chest turn to ice. As the bus approached, I looked out early, expecting the usual lonely figure, but this time he was not alone. Standing just behind him, the shadows, was another shape, taller, thin, almost bent. Its arm rested lightly on his shoulder, though its outline blurred every time I tried to focus on it. When we passed, the boy lifted his head slightly, not enough for me to see his eyes, but enough that I knew he was aware of me. The next morning, I took a different route to work, avoiding the stop completely. Yet all day the image of that hand on his shoulder burned into me that night. I woke to the sound of rain tapping against my window, and something else beneath it, a faint wet shuffling as though small shoes dragged along pavement, stopping directly beneath my window. When I gathered the courage to look out, the glass was fog from the inside, and through the mist I could see a faint outline of a small hand pressed against it after. That night the sound of rain changed for me. It no longer felt like weather, but like a warning, a rhythm that echoed footsteps just slow enough to resemble breathing. I told myself it was my imagination, that the child at the bus stop was nothing more than coincidence or a sad story left to rot on the edge of the city. But the more I tried to believe that, the more the world around me began to twist the second week after I stopped taking the bus. I noticed the footprints again, small wet marks on the hallway floor outside my apartment door. Even though it hadn't rained in 2 days, they stopped right before the doormat and vanished. I thought maybe a neighbor's kid had wandered by, but when I looked closer, the prints were too small, too thin, and oddly far apart, as though the steps were made by something lighter than a person. I ignored it, but that night I woke at exactly the same time again, 3:15 I remember, because the red glow of my alarm clock burned into my eyes. The sound came back, that soft, wet shuffling like bare feet on concrete. It circled the hallway outside my room and stopped directly behind my door. I didn't breathe. For almost a minute the handle didn't move, but the sound of dripping water filled the silence, the same slow pattern I'd heard under the flickering light at the bus stop in the morning. Everything was dry again, but there was a faint handprint on the inside of my door, smudged low near the floor like a child had rested their palm there. The outline was so light I might have dismissed it if I hadn't noticed that it wasn't dusty like the rest of the door, but clean, almost damp. I started leaving earlier for work, walking the long way through the main street, avoiding any view of the bus stop altogether. But even from far away, I could feel the air change. When I got close, the wind would die down, the traffic seemed to thin out, and the silence would stretch like something breathing shallowly beside me. One morning, while crossing the intersection, I glanced back. Despite everything in me screaming not to, the bus stop was empty. No sign of the boy or the taller shadow behind him, but I swear the street light above flickered exactly 3 times before going dark. Completely the moment it did, I heard a faint whisper of laughter, not in the air, but in my own head, like a memory pressed too close. That day at work things felt wrong. People spoke slower, lights flickered. Even indoors, the hum of the office machines seemed to form words under their rhythm. When I passed the window of the break room, I froze. Outside the reflection of the glass, my own image was joined by another, a small shape standing slightly behind me. I turned fast, but no one was there. The air was cold enough to sting my skin. By the 3rd week, my sleep was almost gone. Every night, I'd wake up at the same time to the same dripping sound. But now it wasn't just outside the door. Sometimes it was from the ceiling above my bed, the sound of something pacing slowly back and forth, heavy silence between each step, and then that faint sigh that came from nowhere. One night, I heard the distant echo of a bus engine outside. I hadn't heard that route pass for weeks, but I recognized the sound. Immediately I pulled back the curtain and saw the bus idling across the street, doors open, waiting, no one inside, no driver, but the lights flickering weakly, and just beyond the glow of its headlights stood the boy, motionless again, facing the building, his reflection caught in the wet asphalt. But there was no reflection of me in the window anymore. I shut the curtains and backed away. I could feel something in the room with me, the air pressed tight around my chest like invisible hands trying to hold me still. I whispered anything I could to keep my mind from cracking, but when I dared to glance again, the window was fogged, and on the inside were two handprints this time, one small and one larger. Just above it, I could not move. I only listened to the soft tapping on the glass. The faint scrape of something sharp tracing lines into the fog. I wiped it away with my sleeve and saw faint writing forming on the other side like breath pressed into the surface. The letters came one by one, slow, deliberate stop. Running the fog vanished. The light in my room flickered once and died. The silence that followed was not empty, but full of presence, full of something waiting just out of sight that night. I did not sleep at all. I sat awake watching the window, afraid to blink every so often. I thought I heard soft laughter again, faint as if carried from far away on the wind, the same broken rhythm I had first heard at that lonely bus stop under the flickering light. And though I did not look, I knew the boy was still standing there somewhere in the dark, just waiting for me to come back to him. I stopped counting the days after that week. The nights blurred together in a haze of sleepless hours and creeping noises. I moved through each day like someone walking. Underwater, every reflection shimmered wrong. Every shadow leaned closer than it should have. My co-workers began to avoid me. I could hear them whisper when I passed, pale, tired, acting strange. One of them asked if I was okay, and I told her I was fine. But even as I said it, I could see her eyes flick to the space just behind me like she was staring at something I could not see. I stopped using the bus completely. I walked everywhere, no matter how far. But even then it found me. The boy, or the thing that looked like him, he would appear at the edge of alleys, across intersections, always facing me, but never moving. Once I caught sight of him, standing on the opposite side of the streetlight that flickered with the same dull yellow glow as the one at the bus stop. He stood perfectly still, his arms hanging at his sides, water dripping from his sleeves onto the asphalt that never seemed to darken from the moisture. I started hearing the hum again, a low vibration that began whenever I was alone. It would rise softly through the floorboards or from the walls. It wasn't mechanical. It was something alive, like a voice trying to form without air. Sometimes it came from inside the mirrors, like someone whispering through a layer of glass. Sleep deprivation made everything worse. When I finally managed to drift off, it was only for moments at a time, always waking to the same dream. I would be back at the bus stop, except the light was off and everything was gray. The boy would be there at first, facing away. Then I would blink, and he would be closer the second time. He would be standing right before me, his head still bent low. The third time, he would lift his face, but I never saw his features before I woke, each time choking on air that felt thick and cold. It began following me into waking hours. I started finding small, wet footprints in my apartment, not just by the door now, but across the living room, and once even on my bedspread. I cleaned them every time, but they came back sometimes in pairs, one smaller, one larger. I tried to move to a hotel, but the air there felt no different. The hum followed, the dripping followed, the lights flickered in the same three-pulse rhythm. Then came the morning when the city bus passed my window, and I saw through its fogged glass the passengers all staring forward, motionless. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow. The boy sat among them in the middle row, his hands folded neatly in his lap. I blinked, and the bus was gone, leaving behind only the hiss of rain. That day I went to the police. I told them everything, not about ghosts or cursed children, but about a strange kid who kept showing up near my apartment. They promised to send someone. I knew they wouldn't. That night, I woke to the sound of a bus stopping outside my building. I didn't look out the window. I didn't move, but I heard the doors hiss open and the soft patter of small, wet feet climbing the stairs to my floor. The knocking came next, slow, deliberate, 3 times, always 3, the same rhythm that the light used when it flickered. I didn't answer. I pressed my back against the far wall and waited. The knocking stopped, and the silence that followed lasted too long. Then from the other side of the door came a whisper. It was not a voice in the normal sense. It was the same vibration, the same hum I had heard through the mirrors, a sound that shook the air around it. Without forming words, it pressed against my skull like static. Trying to crawl inside. The next morning, the door was what there was no sign of anyone, but a single mark left in the dust, a small handprint, perfectly clear, smaller than a child's, should be pressed just above the handle the hum stayed after that I heard everywhere at work, in the elevator, in the pipes behind the walls. It was inside me. I could feel it in my bones, vibrating softly in time with my heartbeat. By then I knew the boy was not lost. He was not waiting for a bus or for someone to help him. He was waiting for someone to see him completely, to stop pretending he wasn't there. And now that I had, he would not leave until I followed him back that night. The rain started again, steady and soft. The streetlight outside flickered 3 times and went dark. The night the light went out outside my window was the first time I felt the world folding on itself. The quiet that followed was too perfect. Even the usual hum of the city seemed to fade into nothing. I sat on the floor staring at the dark shape of the curtain and felt the pressure in the air shift, like something enormous was moving somewhere nearby. But just out of sight, I stayed still for almost an hour, then slowly stood and looked outside. The street was empty, wet from a rain that must have fallen earlier, though I hadn't heard. The bus stop was visible from my building, half a block away. The light above it had gone completely black. Only the faint reflection of water pooling on the road gave any shape to it. But even in that near darkness, I could make out a figure standing there, motionless, facing the street. It was the boy. I knew it before my mind could protest. The same small body, the same hanging arms, the same dripping hair. But this time, there was something else about him, a distortion, like the air around him was folding in and out. The edges of his body seemed to fade into the rain and then sharpen again. He was becoming less like a person and more like an idea of one. I do not remember deciding to go outside. I only remember that my body had already done it. The cold hit me like a slap. The world quiet, except for my breath and the soft splash of my steps. The closer I got, the heavier the air became, not colder, but thicker, as if I was walking underwater. The smell of wet metal filled my nose, sharp and sweet, like rust and decay. When I was a few meters away, I stopped, afraid to move further. The boy turned slightly, not enough to show his face, but enough for me to see that his clothes weren't wet from rain, but from something darker, the fabric clinging to his skin like soaked paper. I wanted to speak, to ask who he was, but my throat wouldn't work. Then I heard the hum again, low and steady, rising from beneath my feet like it came from the ground itself. The boy's shoulders twitched once, and then the sound around me changed. The night no longer felt empty. It was filled with motion, things shifting just beyond the edge of my sight. I could hear small splashes all around, as if dozens of feet stepped into shallow water, approaching slowly. I looked down and saw the ground around the bus stop rippling. There were footprints appearing, one after another, pressing into the wet pavement. Though no one was there, the shapes were small, like the boy's, all moving toward me. I stepped back, and the boy lifted his head, just enough of the faint outline of his face to show through the hair. His skin was gray, not from color, but from absence, like something drawn from memory. The shape of his mouth was wrong, too wide, too still. Then the humming stopped, and for the first time, I heard his breath, or what tried to be breathing, long and broken, like the sound of water draining from a pipe. Behind in the air, split open. It was not light or shadow, but a distortion, a curtain of vibrating darkness that stretched upward like a doorway, but without form inside. And I could see movement figures pressing against the surface from within, small and countless like children reaching through fog, but never breaking at the boy turned toward it, then back. To me, he took one step forward. The ground beneath me trembled slightly. I stumbled back, and something brushed my ankle, cold and damp, like the back of a hand. The moment I looked down, the road lights in both directions went out one after another in a perfect line, leaving only the faint glow from the distortion behind the boy. My mind screamed to run, but the body did not obey. I felt the same weight I had felt in my dreams, the invisible hands pressing down, holding me. Still the boy took another step forward, and with it the hum returned, this time louder, deep enough to rattle my teeth. The vibrations climbed up through my legs into my chest until I could feel my heartbeat sinking with it. Then everything stopped. The boy froze, the humming cut out, and for the first time he looked up fully. His face was pale and wrong, eyes hollow like the sockets were filled with dark water that shimmered faintly. His mouth stretched wider than it should have, but still made no sound. The silence that followed was so deep it made the world tilt. When he raised his hand, the space behind him began to pulse, slow, steady, each pulse bending the air like a heartbeat echoing through the road. I realized too late that it was the same rhythm as the bus, arriving the same pattern. The light had flickered in. He was calling something. The air tore open with a noise that wasn't sound. A shape pushed through the distortion, tall and thin like a shadow peeled from the wall. The child's hand dropped and the figure moved. Behind him, its form flickering, half visible, half hidden, but I could see its face, or what passed for one, smooth, featureless like clay. Still, what it leaned close to the boy, as if whispering something directly into his hollow ear. Then both turned toward me together. I ran. I don't remember the direction or how far. When I only remember the sound following me, not footsteps, not voices, but that endless low hum like the city itself had started to breathe along with them. By the time I reached my building, the sky had turned pale with the first light of dawn. I locked the door and slid to the floor, shaking my lungs, burning with air that felt too heavy to breathe through the window. I could still see the bus stop, empty now, but the ground beneath it glistened too dark, too thick, like something still lingering there, waiting. When the sun rose fully, the light finally returned to the pole, but the air around it shimmered faintly like heat rising off asphalt. Even in daylight, I could still hear it if I listened close enough. The faint echo of humming from beneath the ground, steady and patient, and I knew night would come again. I didn't sleep for 2 nights after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the boy's face, or what was left of it, and that sound, the hum, it never stopped completely. It hid under everything, the noise of the fan, the rumble of traffic, the sound of my heartbeat. It was everywhere, and it was waiting. By the 3rd night, exhaustion won. I drifted into sleep without meaning to, and woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my door, slow, wet, dragging steps like bare feet on linoleum. I held my breath, listening. It stopped right at my door, and then silence followed. I counted to 10, then 20, then 40. Nothing. When I finally looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty except for a trail of water leading toward the stairs, the same water, thick and dark, the same smell of iron. I should have locked myself in my room until morning, but something inside me said I had to know, I had to end it. I grabbed my phone and went outside. The city was still alive around me, but it didn't feel real. The air carried that same weight, that same quiet undercurrent that had haunted the bus stop. The hum was stronger, now pulsing through the pavement under my feet. It was leading me back. When I reached the bus stop, the light above flickered 3 times, then stayed on dim, and sickly the ground was damp again, though it hadn't rained all day. The smell hit me before I even saw the shape sitting on the bench. The boy, he was there again, hunched over staring at his feet. But he wasn't alone. Behind the glass of the shelter, the air rippled and bent like heat rising from asphalt. Figures were faintly visible, within dozens of them pressed against the surface of the world. From the other side, small, pale faces, children, all of them, their mouths moving in slow, silent patterns like they were trying to speak, but couldn't. The boy sat still, but his reflection in the glass behind him was wrong, twisted, and facing me, even though his back was turned. I forced myself forward, every step heavier than the last. When I reached the curb, I said something, though my voice came out broken. I asked him who he was, what he wanted, why he kept appearing. He didn't move. He only lifted his head slightly enough for me to see the black water dripping from his chin. It hit the ground and rippled outward, spreading faster than water should. Then the world around me began to dim. The street lights bent inward, their light collapsing into narrow cones. The air vibrated so violently I could feel it against my skin. The reflections in the shelter began to move faster, the children pressing harder against the invisible surface until I could hear faint cracks forming like ice under weight. The boy stood slowly. He turned to face me completely for the first time. His eyes were hollow, his mouth hanging open wider than any human mouth should be, and from it came that sound, the humming. But now I understood it. It wasn't just sound, it was a voice, many voices layered and buried, calling from beneath. Everything, like the earth itself, was whispering. I stumbled backward, but something caught my leg. I looked down and saw a small hand gripping my ankle. Another appeared, then another, dozens of them rising through the cracks in the pavement, small gray hands pulling, dragging. I kicked free and fell onto the road. My palms hit the wet surface, and when I looked up, the boy was inches away. His mouth moved, but no sound came out, just the vibration pressing into my skull until I could feel my thoughts starting to fragment. I don't know how long I lay there. The world around me was dissolving, the buildings, the street. Everything faded into a shifting gray like fog that had weight. I could see shapes moving inside it, tall, thin figures walking in slow rhythm around the bus stop, circling it like they were guarding something. The boy stepped closer and placed his cold, wet hand on my face. The hum stopped for the first time, and in the silence I heard something else, a whisper, not from outside, but from inside my head, a memory that wasn't mine. I saw flashes of flooded underpass years ago, a bus turned over in the dark, children trapped inside water, rising, their hands pressed against the windows, a hum from the engine still running as the lights flickered one by one. The boy was one of them. He wasn't calling for help, he was calling others. I realized then what the bus stop was, not a place of waiting, but a door, a thin point between what lived and what didn't. The hum wasn't sound, it was the pull, the heartbeat of the thing beneath this city, something that feeds on memory, on the fear of being forgotten. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on the side of the road. The sky was pale dawn again. The bus stop was gone, replaced by an empty patch of cracked sidewalk. The light post stood crooked and dead, no sign it had ever been lit. The ground was dry, my clothes clean, no trace of water, no trail, no footprints. I walked home half certain I'd lost my mind, but when I reached my door, something was wedged beneath it, my bus pass. I hadn't used one in years, but this one had my name burned into it. And below it, a wet handprint, small child sized, still glistening that night. I tried to stay awake, but the hum returned as soon as darkness fell, louder than ever, rattling through the walls and pipes. I looked outside and saw the reflection of the bus stop in the glass of my window. It wasn't there physically, but I could see it as clear as day, the bench, the pole, the flickering light. And sitting on the bench was the boy waiting patiently facing the street, as if expecting someone to join him. I don't know how long I have before the next bus comes, but I know it's coming. I can feel in the floor and the pulse of the world around me. When I close my eyes, I see headlights moving slowly through the fog, stopping at the place that doesn't exist. And somewhere inside the hum, I can hear the boy whispering softly, "Come wait with me. Just for a while, it won't take long. If you ever see a bus stop where no bus ever comes, don't look too long. Don't listen to the hum beneath your feet. Don't wait to see who's sitting there. Because once you notice them, once you hear that sound, you've already started waiting, and it never ends."